The morning sun peeked through the floor-to-ceiling windows of TechFusion's headquarters, casting long shadows across Adrian Chen's pristine desk. At 35, he had everything most people dreamed of: a successful tech company worth billions, a penthouse overlooking the bay, and more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. But today, something felt off. He walked into his office at exactly 7:15 a.m., just like every other morning. The fresh coffee was already waiting on his desk, steam rising from his favorite blue ceramic mug. His schedule for the day was printed and arranged perfectly beside his laptop, color-coded sticky notes marking the most important meetings. Everything was in its place, just as Lily Anderson, his executive assistant of 5 years, always ensured. Adrian picked up the coffee, took a sip, and froze. There, beneath the schedule, was an envelope with his name written in Lily's neat handwriting. His stomach did an unexpected flip. Lily never left personal notes. Everything was digital, efficient, streamlined. That's why they worked so well together. Opening the envelope with slightly trembling fingers, he pulled out a single sheet of paper. His eyes scanned the first line. "Dear Mr. Chen, I am writing to formally submit my resignation." The coffee mug nearly slipped from his hand. He read the letter again, then a third time, but the words didn't change. 2 weeks' notice. Moving on to pursue other opportunities. Grateful for the experience. All the standard phrases were there, but they made no sense. Lily couldn't leave. She was Lily. Memories started flooding back as he sat there, staring at the letter. The time she stayed until 3 a.m. helping him prepare for the biggest presentation of his career. How she somehow always knew when he was having a rough day and would quietly place his favorite dark chocolate bar on his desk. The way she handled difficult clients with such grace that they'd end up apologizing for their behavior. The sound of his office door opening snapped him back to reality. There she was, walking in with her tablet in hand, dressed in her usual elegant but understated style. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her expression professional as always. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," she said, her voice carrying its usual calm efficiency. "You have the board meeting at 9, followed by the development team update at 11. I've prepared all the reports you'll need." She placed a folder on his desk, perfectly aligned with the edge. Adrian opened his mouth to say something about the letter, but what came out instead was, "The coffee's perfect today." "Thank you, sir," she replied with a small smile. "Will you need anything else for the board meeting?" He wanted to ask why. Why was she leaving? Why now? Why hadn't he seen this coming? But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he just shook his head, and she turned to leave. As he watched her walk away, Adrian realized something that hit him like a punch to the gut. In 5 years, he'd never really looked at Lily. Sure, he'd seen her every day, relied on her for everything from scheduling his meetings to remembering his mother's birthday. But he'd never really seen her as a person with her own dreams, ambitions, and life beyond making his world run smoothly. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. He sat through the board meeting, nodding at appropriate times, but his mind kept wandering to the letter in his desk drawer. During his lunch break, he found himself scrolling through old emails, calendar entries, and project files, 5 years' worth of daily interactions. Each one showed him something he'd missed. Her brilliant problem-solving skills, her supple humor in difficult situations, her ability to handle complex project management while making it look effortless. By late afternoon, Adrian stood at his office window, watching the San Francisco traffic below. His reflection stared back at him, expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, the picture of success. But for the first time in years, he felt like something was slipping through his fingers, something more valuable than any deal or acquisition he'd ever made. His phone buzzed with a reminder. Interview candidates for executive assistant position. Tomorrow 9 a.m. Lily had already started organizing her replacement. Of course she had. She was always 10 steps ahead. The thought of someone else sitting at that desk outside his office, someone else trying to learn his habits and preferences, made his chest tight in a way he couldn't explain. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the city's skyline, Adrian realized he barely accomplished anything all day. His mind kept circling back to one thought. How had he never noticed that Lily wasn't just an employee? She was the foundation his success was built on, the person who understood him better than anyone else, and now she was leaving. He gathered his things to head home, his movements mechanical. As he passed Lily's desk, he noticed her small potted succulent, the only personal item she kept in the office. It had been there so long he'd stopped seeing it, just like he'd stopped seeing so many things. The elevator doors closed behind him, and Adrian Chen, the billionaire tech mogul who could solve any problem with enough money or innovation, had no idea how to fix this one. Because for the first time, he was facing a problem that had nothing to do with technology or business strategy. It had everything to do with his own blindness to what had been right in front of him all along. The Human Resources Department had sent over 15 resumes for Adrian to review. Each candidate looked perfect on paper: prestigious universities, impressive work experience, glowing recommendations. But as he sat in his office the next morning, staring at the files spread across his desk, all he could think about was how Lily had never needed a resume to prove her worth. He picked up his coffee and grimaced. The new intern had made it too bitter, too hot, and somehow already cold at the same time. Lily would have known exactly how long to let it cool, the perfect amount of cream to add. It was such a small thing, but it sparked a chain of realizations that hit him one after another. Yesterday, during the board meeting, he'd had to scramble to find his own presentation files. This morning, he'd shown up to a meeting 15 minutes early because he'd forgotten to check for schedule changes. And just an hour ago, he'd accidentally offended an important client because no one had briefed him on their recent family tragedy. Mr. Chen. His temporary assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The first interview candidate is here. Adrian sighed, straightening his tie. Send them in. The interviews were a disaster. The first candidate spoke about streamlining his calendar with artificial intelligence. The second promised to modernize his filing system. The third talked about implementing new communication protocols. They were all missing the point. He didn't need more efficiency. He needed. His eyes drifted to Lily's desk outside his office. Through the glass walls, he could see her talking on the phone, probably solving another crisis he didn't even know about. As he watched, she covered the mouthpiece to laugh at something, and suddenly he remembered that night 6 months ago. It had been well past midnight. They were preparing for a major product launch, both exhausted from weeks of preparation. He'd made some terrible joke about coding bugs, and Lily had laughed, not her usual polite chuckle, but a real, genuine laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. In that moment, she'd looked so human. Not just his assistant, but a person with her own joy, her own light. Mr. Chen. The fourth interview candidate was staring at him expectantly. I'm sorry, he said, standing up. Something's come up. We'll have to reschedule. After the candidate left, Adrian found himself walking through the office, really looking at it for the first time in years. There was the break room where Lily always set up birthday celebrations for employees, not just putting out a cake, but remembering everyone's favorites. The conference room where she'd once stayed up all night with him during a crisis, keeping him focused with. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Adrian watched as Lily packed up her desk for the day. She moved with the same quiet efficiency she always had, but now he noticed other things too. How she smiled at the cleaning staff, how she straightened the magazines in the waiting area before leaving, how she seemed to carry a kind of grace that had nothing to do with her job title. As she walked toward the elevator, Adrian realized he was watching more than his assistant leave. He was watching the heart of his company walk away. No, more than that. He was watching someone who had become essential to his life choose a different path, and he had no idea how to process that. The worst part wasn't that she was leaving. The worst part was that it had taken her resignation for him to understand just how much she meant, not to his company or his success, but to him. And now, sitting alone in his office with a cold cup of badly made coffee, Adrian Chen, the man who had built an empire by seeing patterns others missed, wondered how he could have been so blind to the most important pattern of all. Adrian couldn't sleep that night. The city lights twinkled below his penthouse window as he paced back and forth, his mind racing. Where exactly was Lily going? She'd mentioned a non-profit in her resignation letter, but something about it didn't add up. Lily had always loved the fast-paced world of tech. Why would she suddenly switch to the non-profit sector? The next morning, he did something he'd never done before. He arrived at the office early, before Lily. Settling into his chair, he opened his laptop and began searching. It took only a few minutes to find the announcement on the nonprofit's website. Rising Stars Foundation welcomes new chief of staff. The position was perfect for her, leading strategic initiatives, managing key relationships, shaping organizational culture. Everything she'd been doing for him, but now she'd finally get the recognition she deserved. But Seattle? That was on the other side of the country. The thought of her being so far away made his chest tight. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Tom, his chief financial officer and oldest friend, stood in the doorway with 2 coffee cups. "You look terrible," Tom said, placing 1 cup on Adrian's desk. "Heard about Lily." Adrian ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Did you know she was planning to leave?" Tom sat down, his expression careful. "We all saw it coming." "Well, everyone except you." "What's that supposed to mean?" Tom took a long sip of his coffee, choosing his words carefully. "Remember the holiday party last year? When Lily showed up in that red dress?" Adrian frowned. He vaguely remembered the party. He'd been preoccupied with a major deal and had only made a brief appearance. "Everyone noticed how she looked at you," Tom continued. "Everyone except you. You walked right past her, talking on your phone about server capacities." The memory hit Adrian like a punch to the gut. He remembered now. Lily had looked different that night, radiant even. But he'd been too busy to notice, too focused on work to see what was right in front of him. "She's been in love with you for years," Tom said quietly. "But she kept it professional because she knew you only saw her as an employee. Do you know how many times she defended you when people called you cold or distant? How many times she worked through the night just because you were working late too?" Adrian felt like the floor was tilting beneath him. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" "Would you have listened?" Tom asked. "Besides, it wasn't our place to say anything. Lily handled it with grace like she handles everything. But I guess everyone has their breaking point." Later that day, Adrian watched through his office window as Lily led a training session with her replacement, a capable young woman named Amy. Lily was smiling, patient as always, explaining the complex web of responsibilities she'd managed so effortlessly for years. He opened his calendar and scrolled back through the years. There it was. Every birthday he'd never forgotten because of her, every anniversary he'd remembered, every important meeting he'd been perfectly prepared for. But there were other things too, things he'd never noticed before. Like how she'd always scheduled his most stressful meetings for Tuesday mornings when he was freshest. How she'd blocked off an hour every Wednesday afternoon for strategic planning, which he now realized was her way of making sure he had time to breathe between meetings. His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Heard Lily's leaving." What did you do? Even his mother knew. Had he really been that blind? He minimized his calendar and pulled up the company's message board. Scrolling through old posts, he found dozens of photos from company events. Holiday parties, summer picnics, charity drives. In every one, Lily was there in the background, making sure everything ran smoothly. But there was something else in those photos, something in the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his office as Adrian sat there, lost in thought. Outside, he could hear Lily's gentle laugh as she explained another office procedure to Emmy. The sound made his heart ache in a way he'd never experienced before. A memory surfaced. Last winter, during the big snowstorm. He'd insisted on coming to the office despite the weather warnings. When he'd arrived, the building was nearly empty, but Lily was there, a cup of hot coffee waiting on his desk. She'd stayed all day, not because she had to, but because she didn't want him to be alone. Now she was leaving, not just his office, but the entire city. She'd built a life here, had friends and favorite places, but she was leaving it all behind. Why? Because staying close to him while maintaining professional distance had become too painful. The realization hit him hard. He hadn't just failed to see her feelings, he'd failed to see her. Really see her. And now she was choosing herself, her own happiness, her own future. Part of him wanted to rush out there, tell her to stay, promise things would be different. But another part, the part that was finally growing up, knew that wasn't fair. As the day drew to a close, Adrian watched Lily gather her things to leave. She moved with the same quiet efficiency she always had, but now he saw the cost of that efficiency. Years of putting his needs before her own, of loving someone who looked right through her. Tom's words echoed in his mind. Everyone has their breaking point. Lily had reached hers, and instead of breaking down, she was breaking free. The thought filled him with a mixture of pride and pain. Pride in her courage to choose herself, pain at the realization of everything he'd missed. The city lights began to twinkle on as evening fell. Soon, those lights would no longer be part of Lily's daily view. Soon, she would be building a new life in Seattle, far from the man who had taken 5 years to realize what he had right in front of him. 3 weeks. That's all Adrian had left before Lily would walk out of his life forever. The thought made him feel like he couldn't breathe properly. He had to do something, but what? He'd spent years building a tech empire, yet he had no idea how to show someone he cared. His first attempt was coffee. He'd watched Lily make his perfect cup hundreds of times. How hard could it be? The next morning, he arrived early, carefully carrying 2 cups from the fancy coffee shop down the street. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound casual as he placed 1 cup on her desk. "I thought you might like some coffee." Lily looked up, surprised. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. That's unexpected." He stood there awkwardly as she took a sip. Her face remained polite, but he could tell something was wrong. "Is it okay?" he asked. "It's very sweet," she said diplomatically. After 5 years, he didn't even know how she took her coffee. He wanted to sink through the floor. Later that week, he tried to join the office lunch group when he overheard them planning their usual Thursday gathering. He'd never gone before, always eating at his desk or in business meetings. "Mind if I join?" he asked, hovering near their cluster of desks. The conversation stopped abruptly. Everyone stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Of course," Lily answered smoothly, breaking the awkward silence. "We're trying that new place around the corner." Lunch was a disaster. He had no idea how to make small talk. When someone mentioned their kid's school play, he started rambling about educational technology trends. When another person talked about their weekend plans, he accidentally turned it into a discussion about work-life balance metrics. He caught Lily watching him with a mixture of amusement and something else. Was it pity? The thought made him feel even worse. His next attempt came during the weekly team meeting. Usually, he'd dive straight into projects and deadlines, but this time he tried something different. "Before we start," he said, clearing his throat, "I thought we could do some team building." The silence was deafening. In the corner, Tom was trying not to laugh. "Maybe we could all share something about our weekend," Adrian continued desperately. "Sir," Lily interrupted gently, "the development team is waiting for the product review call." "Right," he said, feeling his face heat up. "Of course, let's proceed with the agenda." As the days ticked by, Adrian grew more frustrated with himself. Everything he tried felt forced and awkward. He bought donuts for the office but got the wrong kinds. He tried to remember personal details about his employees but mixed up their stories. He even attempted to join the office fantasy football league, only to realize it was baseball season. One evening, he overheard 2 employees talking in the break room. "What's up with Chen lately?" one asked. "He's acting weird." "Haven't you heard? He's trying to convince Lily to stay." "Bit late for that, isn't it?" Adrian slipped away before they could see him, their words echoing in his head. They were right. It was too late. He'd had 5 years to see Lily as more than just his assistant, and he'd wasted every minute of it. 2 weeks left now. He watched as Lily efficiently packed up her personal items, 1 small box at a time. The small plant on her desk disappeared on Tuesday. The family photos came down on Wednesday. Each missing item felt like another punch to his gut. In a moment of desperation, he even tried to attend the office happy hour, something he'd dismissed as unproductive for years. He showed up at the local bar, ordered a club soda, and stood awkwardly near the group, trying to follow conversations about TV shows he'd never watched and movies he'd never seen. Lily found him there, nursing his drink alone at the bar, while everyone else chatted and laughed. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "Do what?" "Trying to be someone you are not." She sat down next to him, her eyes kind. "The office doesn't need you to be their friend, Mr. Chen. They need you to be their leader." "And what do you need?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. She was quiet for a long moment. "I need to move on," she finally said. "And I think you know why." He did know why. Every awkward attempt he'd made to connect over the past week had only proven how little he'd bothered to learn about her, about any of them, over the years. He couldn't undo that with a few gestures now. The next morning, he found a sticky note on his desk with his schedule written in Lily's neat handwriting. Just like always. As if his world wasn't about to change completely. As if she hadn't just told him, in the gentlest way possible, that his revelation had come too late. 1 week left. 7 days to somehow make up for 5 years of blindness. 7 days to learn how to run his company without the one person who made everything work. 7 days to accept that sometimes, no matter how much money or power you have, you can't fix what you broke by not caring enough when it mattered. Adrian stood at his office window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Behind him, he could hear Lily's quiet, efficient movements as she prepared to leave for the day. Each sound felt like a countdown timer, ticking away the moments until she'd be gone. He'd built his entire career on being ahead of the curve, on seeing opportunities before anyone else. But he'd missed the most important opportunity of all, the chance to see the remarkable person who had been right in front of him all along. And now, like the sun sinking below the horizon, his time was running out. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. The new server launch was meant to be perfect. Adrian had checked everything himself 3 times. But at 11:30 p.m., just as he was about to head home, every alert in the system started going off at once. The entire platform was crashing. "Everyone who can get online now," he shouted across the nearly empty office. The few developers still there jumped into action, fingers flying across keyboards. But it wasn't enough. They needed more help. His phone buzzed. It was Lily. "I saw the alerts," she said simply. "I'm on my way back." He wanted to tell her no, that she didn't have to come, that this wasn't her problem anymore. But the words stuck in his throat because the truth was he needed her there. 20 minutes later, she walked in, still wearing the dress from her friend's dinner party that she'd left early to come back. She didn't say anything, just set up her laptop and started coordinating with the emergency response team. Hours ticked by. Empty coffee cups and takeout containers piled up as they fought to get the system back online. Adrian watched as Lily moved between teams, making sure everyone had what they needed, keeping track of every attempted fix. By 3 a.m., most of the immediate fires were out. The platform was limping along, but at least it was running. The exhausted team started heading home, leaving just Adrian and Lily in his office, surrounded by the aftermath of their emergency response. "You should go home," he said, rubbing his tired eyes. "You didn't have to stay." "Yes, I did." She was gathering empty cups, tiny and even now, always taking care of everything. Everyone. Why? She paused, looking at him with those understanding eyes that had seen him through countless crises. "Because that's what I do." "But you're leaving." The words came out more bitter than he intended. "That doesn't mean I stopped caring." The office was eerily quiet at this hour. Through the windows, they could see the city sleeping below, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded in this room. A police siren wailed in the distance, then faded away. "I don't know how to do this without you," Adrian admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily set down the cups she was collecting. "Yes, you do. You just never had to try before." "That's not what I meant." He stood up, pacing to the window. "I don't know how to. I don't want to do this without you." The silence that followed felt heavy with 5 years of unspoken words. "Do you remember last Christmas?" she asked suddenly. "When you missed your flight home because you were working late?" He nodded. Of course he remembered. She'd stayed with him, ordering Chinese food and helping him finish the year-end reports. "I called your mother," she continued. "Explained why you weren't coming. And do you know what she said?" She said, "Thank goodness he has you, dear. You're the only one who sees the good in him, even when he doesn't see it himself." Adrian turned to look at her, really look at her, in the dim light of his office. She looked tired, but somehow still elegant, even at 3 a.m. with smudged makeup and messy hair. "Your mother was right," Lily said softly. "I've always seen the good in you. The brilliant mind that wants to change the world. The kind heart you try so hard to hide. The potential to be not just successful, but truly happy. Then why are you leaving?" His voice cracked on the last word. "Because sometimes seeing the good in someone isn't enough. Sometimes you have to see the good in yourself too. She took a deep breath. I need to find out who I am without being the person who takes care of you. The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. All these years, he'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd never noticed he was standing on someone else's foundation. I've been selfish, he admitted. No, she corrected gently. You've been lost. There's a difference. A cleaning crew member appeared in the doorway, then quickly backed away, sensing the moment. It's late, Lally said, gathering her things. We should both get some rest. Wait. Adrian moved toward her, then stopped, uncertain. I'm sorry. Not just for tonight, but for every time I took you for granted. For every time I didn't see you. She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. I know. But timing is everything in life, Mr. Chen. Sometimes realizations come too late. Please, he said quietly. Call me Adrian. At least now, when it's just us. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Good night, Adrian. He watched her walk away, her heels clicking softly on the floor. Even now, even after everything, she walked with grace and purpose. She was right. Timing was everything. And he had missed his chance by about 5 years. The sun was starting to rise as Adrian finally left the office. The city was waking up, ready for another day. But for him, something was ending. In the pale morning light, he finally understood what people meant when they talked about the price of success. He had built an empire of technology, but somewhere along the way, he had missed the chance to build something far more valuable, a connection with someone who saw the best in him, even when he couldn't see it himself. The morning after their late-night conversation, Adrian sat in his office, staring at a blank document on his computer. He'd been trying to write up a counteroffer for Lily for the past hour. The cursor blinked mockingly at him as he struggled to find the right words. He could offer her anything, a promotion to Chief Operations Officer, double her salary, stock options worth millions, even partial ownership of the company. Money had always been his solution to everything, but something felt wrong about throwing it at this problem. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Tom, holding 2 cups of coffee. You look terrible, Tom said, placing 1 cup on Adrian's desk. Heard about the server crisis last night. Lily stayed to help. Adrian nodded, picking up the coffee. She didn't have to, but she did. That's who she is, Tom said, settling into a chair, always putting others first. I'm writing up a counteroffer, Adrian admitted. Want to take a look? Tom glanced at the blank screen and raised an eyebrow. Having trouble finding the right number? Having trouble finding the right anything? Adrian pushed back from his desk, frustrated. I could offer her the moon on a string, but you know that's not what she wants, Tom finished. Adrian stood up and walked to the window. Below, the city was alive with morning traffic. Somewhere out there, Lily was probably already looking for apartments in Seattle. You know what I remember about Lily? Tom said, swirling his coffee. Last year, when my daughter was in the hospital, Lily visited every day after work, brought books, sat with her so I could grab dinner. Never said a word about it to anyone. Adrian turned back to his friend. I didn't know that. Of course you didn't, because Lily never does things for recognition. She does them because she cares. Tom set down his cup. That's why throwing money at this won't work. You can't buy what she's already given freely for years. The truth of those words hit Adrian hard. He walked back to his desk and deleted the blank document. So what do I do? Maybe, Tom said carefully, the question isn't what you can do to make her stay. Maybe it's what you can do to help her go. The idea felt like a punch to the gut, but somewhere deep down, Adrian knew his friend was right. Later that day, he watched through his office window as Lily trained Amy, her replacement. She was patient, thorough, explaining not just what to do, but why each task mattered. Even now, she was giving everything she had to make sure the transition would be smooth. Adrian opened his email and began to write. Not a counteroffer, but a recommendation letter. He poured everything into it, her brilliance at crisis management, her exceptional leadership skills, her ability to build bridges between technical and non-technical teams, all the things he should have recognized and rewarded years ago. When he finished, he read it over. It was possibly the most honest thing he'd ever written. Walking to the printer to retrieve the letter, he passed by the break room. Inside, Lily was showing Amy how to handle the coffee machine, the same machine she used to make his perfect cup every morning for 5 years. The thing about Mr. Chen, he overheard her saying, is that he works so hard to make the world better through technology, he sometimes forgets about the human element. Your job isn't just to manage his schedule, it's to help him remember. Adrian stepped back quietly, those words echoing in his head. Even now, even while leaving, she was trying to make sure he'd be okay. That afternoon, he made another decision. He called the head of HR. I want to implement some changes, he said, starting with regular performance reviews, proper work-life balance policies, and a mentorship program. And I want to review all current salaries, make sure we're recognizing people's real value, not just their job titles. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. And sir, the HR director finally said, what brought this on? Adrian looked out at his office, at all the people who had given years of their lives to his vision. Let's just say I'm learning some overdue lessons. The next morning, he left 2 envelopes on Lily's desk. One contained his glowing recommendation letter. The other held contact information for the best real estate agent in Seattle, along with a note, to help you find your perfect new home. Not because you need it, but because you deserve it. When Lily found the envelopes, she looked up at him through the glass walls of his office. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither moved. Then she smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes, and nodded once. That evening, as the office emptied out, Adrian stayed late. Not working, just thinking. He'd spent his whole life believing that success meant never letting go, always fighting for more. But maybe real success, real growth, meant knowing when to open your hands and let someone fly free. From his window, he could see Lily's empty desk. Soon, someone else would sit there. They'd probably be competent, professional, efficient, but they wouldn't be her. And maybe that was okay. Maybe that was exactly how it needed to be. Because sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about being brave enough to help someone else spread their wings, even if it means watching them soar away from you. The day of Lily's farewell party arrived with a strange mix of sunshine and rain, typical weather for a San Francisco morning. The office had arranged everything in the large conference room, with pastries from her favorite bakery and coffee from the little shop around the corner that she loved. Adrian stood at the back of the room, watching as people hugged Lily and shared their favorite memories. The young developer who told everyone about how Lily had helped him practice for his promotion interview. The receptionist who remembered how Lily had stayed late to help her learn the new phone system. Even the cleaning staff had come in early to say goodbye, bringing homemade cookies because Lily had always remembered their birthdays. He'd spent hours trying to write a speech, but every attempt felt hollow. How do you sum up 5 years of someone quietly changing your life? Instead, he'd written her a letter, not typed, but handwritten, something he hadn't done since college. The party was winding down when Tom clinked his glass for attention. Lily, he said, his voice warm, you've been the heart of this company for 5 years. We're all better people for having known you. To new beginnings. To new beginnings, everyone echoed, raising their coffee cups. Lily smiled, wiping a tear from her eye. Thank you all. This place, these people, you've been my family. And families support each other's dreams, even when those dreams take us in different directions. Her eyes met Adrian's across the room. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the gentle reference to their late-night conversation. After the party, as people drifted back to their desks, Adrian approached Lily's now empty workspace. She was placing the last few items in a box, a small photo frame, a coffee mug with a silly tech joke, a plant that had somehow survived 5 years under fluorescent lights. I have something for you, he said quietly, holding out the envelope with his letter. More real estate contacts, she teased gently. No, just words I should have said a long time ago. She took the envelope but didn't open it. Thank you, Adrian. It was only the second time she used his first name. Somehow, that made everything feel more final. 6 months passed. The seasons changed, life moved on. Amy turned out to be a capable assistant, though she organized things differently than Lily had. The company continued to grow, but with new policies in place, regular team lunches, mentorship programs, better work-life balance. Small changes that were slowly building a more human workplace. Adrian found himself at a tech conference in Seattle. He hadn't planned it that way, or maybe he had, subconsciously. Either way, his heart beat a little faster when he saw her name on the panel list, Innovation in Nonprofit Technology, featuring Lily Chen, Chief of Staff, Rising Stars Foundation. He slipped into the back of the conference room just as she was beginning her presentation. She looked different, more confident somehow. Her hair was shorter, and she wore bright colors instead of her old professional neutrals. But her smile was the same, lining up the room as she spoke passionately about using technology to help underprivileged kids access education. After the panel, he waited until the crowd around her thinned out. "That was an impressive presentation," he said. She turned, surprise flickering across her face before being replaced by a warm smile. "Adrian, I didn't know you were coming to this conference." "Neither did I until last week." He paused. "Would you like to get coffee, if you have time?" They found a small coffee shop a few blocks from the conference center. It was nothing like the sleek cafes near their old office, all mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Somehow, it felt right. "So," she said, stirring her coffee, "oat milk, no sugar." He finally knew. "How's Tech Fusion?" "Different. Better, I think. We started that mentorship program you always talked about." Her eyes lit up. "Really? How's it going?" "We've discovered some amazing talent we might have missed before. People who just needed someone to see their potential." He looked at her meaningfully. "I had a good teacher in that department." She smiled, acknowledging the compliment. "And how are you?" "Learning. Growing. Trying to be better at seeing people, not just productivity metrics." He took a sip of his coffee. "Your letter helped." "You read it?" "Many times. I keep it in my desk drawer. Whenever I'm about to make a decision that affects people's lives, I read it again." She was quiet for a moment, playing with her cup. "I read yours too. It meant a lot." They talked for hours, catching up on months of life. She told him about her new projects, her small but cozy apartment overlooking Puget Sound, the cooking classes she'd finally found time to take. He shared stories about the company's changes, Tom's daughter's recovery, the new office dog policy that had transformed their workplace culture. As the afternoon sun began to fade, they finally stood to leave. The awkwardness of their last days together had been replaced by something new, a comfortable friendship between equals. "I'm glad you came to the conference," Lally said as they stood outside the coffee shop. "Me too." Adrian hesitated, then added, "You look happy." "I am. And you?" He thought about it honestly, getting there, one day at a time. They hugged goodbye, something they'd never done in 5 years of working together. As Adrian watched her walk away, he realized something. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about two people ending up together. Sometimes they're about two people helping each other become who they were always meant to be. The Seattle rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining in the evening light. Adrian pulled out his phone to check his schedule, a habit he'd learned from Lily, and smiled at what he saw. Andy had blocked off his evening with a simple note: "Time to explore the city." Some lessons, once learned, stay with you forever. And sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing you how to be better, even if they can't stay to see the results.